There's a sea of humanity jamming on. We're pulling them on as fast as we can. We're pulling away. We're leaving them behind. We're pulling up.
That report from CBS News correspondent Bruce Dunning inside a plane at the Da Nang airport. South Vietnamese soldiers, terrified by the enemy's advance, fighting to get on that outgoing plane, fighting each other, kicking and beating women and children. Soldiers in panic.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Weekend News with Dan Rather and Bruce Dunning in Da Nang, South Vietnam, Peter Collins in Bien Hoa, Murray Frompson in Saigon, Bernard Kalb at the Pentagon, Robert Pierpoint at the White House, Mike Wallace in Los Angeles, Tony Sargent in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Haywood Hale Broun tonight with a special report, Truman, the Nostalgia Years.
Good evening. Two major stories lead tonight's news. President Ford will announce within the hour whether, as expected, he will sign the tax cut bill, and we'll have details on that later in the broadcast. In South Vietnam, Da Nang has become a Dunkirk, with one crucial difference. Unlike Dunkirk in World War II, Da Nang is stricken with rampant panic. As the enemy approaches, the panic has swept from the coastal city's crowded back streets and pagodas onto runways at the airport. American Ed Daly, president of World Airways, has been flying refugees to Saigon. But today, the government and the U.S. Embassy refused to guarantee airport security because of mobs rushing the planes. Despite that, Daly flew in today to pick up women and children. CBS News combat correspondent Bruce Dunning was among the last of the Americans to leave Da Nang late this week, but he went back aboard Daly's plane today to witness what was supposed to have been a mission of mercy. Here is Dunning's exclusive film report on the tragic results.
Reports from Saigon said thousands of people were roaming Da Nang airfield. But as the plane landed, this did not at first seem evident. But then people poured from behind buildings and revetments, racing on cars, jeeps, trucks, Hondas, and on foot, desperate to get to the plane and make sure they got on before anyone else.
One guy got on.
As soon as the rear stairway was lowered, the stampede of terrorized people tried to storm the plane. From the cockpit, the pilots reported by radio that the situation was out of control. Several times the pilots moved the plane, hoping to break the crowds around the rear ladder. There was no control. High-ranking officers in Da Nang have fled, leaving soldiers and airmen to fend for themselves. The hordes tried to jam up the stairway as Daly himself tried to block the stairs. As men clambered over one another, pushing aside women and children in their panic-stricken fury, members of the air crew dragged them onto the plane, trying to fill it as fast as possible. The tension and panic intensified. The heavily armed men were menacing. They left their wives, their children, their aged parents on the runway while they forced their own way on board, a rabble of young enlisted men. CBS News cameraman Mike Marriott and soundman Mai Van Duk dared not leave the plane, aware they might not be able to get back on. One newsman was left behind as the crowd pushed him out of reach of the plane. The stewardesses dragged people on and rushed them to seats, screaming all the while, "Where are the women and children?" They piled 4, 5, and 6 men into seats intended for 3. Finally, there was room for no more. The plane began to move as people still clambered up the ladder. Angry men left behind fired pistols and automatic weapons at the plane, determined that no one would go if they couldn't. A grenade went off under one wing, damaging it. Unable to move on the blockaded runway, the plane raced down the taxiway, swerving to avoid abandoned vehicles, perhaps even running over people. As the plane strained laboriously into the air, people were still clinging to the wheels and the rear stairs. 7 men fell off as the plane reached heights of 1,000 feet or more. As the plane reached 6,000 feet, 1 man was still stuck in the ladder. Daly had to climb out and pull him back as the plane swerved and shuddered under its heavy load. As calm fell on the smug men who had managed to fight off their friends and relatives to get on, the hard-working cabin crew took account. 268 people were on board, among them 5 women and 2 or 3 small children. The rest were some of the men whom President Thieu said would defend Da Nang. They had no apparent feelings about leaving others behind, only gratitude that World Airways had saved their lives, with a flight that Ed Daly intended for refugee women and children. Once in flight at low altitude, because the damaged rear stairway wouldn't close, the pilots assessed the damage to the plane. Bullets had damaged gas lines and the plane was losing fuel. The pilots were not sure the wheels would function on landing because people had attempted to hide in the wheel wells. The flight from Da Nang to Saigon normally takes about 50 minutes. This one took more than an hour and a half. Another World Airways plane flew alongside trying to assess the damage and reported that the cargo hatches were open and full of people.
Do you think the nose gear will come down, or you can't tell yet? Can't tell, and I don't want to check until we get in closer. That's the biggest problem I see at the moment here. Long 945, clear to Saigon. There's something hanging down in my gear doors. It may be a body. Did you say a body? Well, I can't tell. It sure looks like it. Could be. We had them climbing all over.
One man on the escort plane said that crew was praying for us on the damaged plane. Not knowing whether the wheel assemblies would hold, the flight crew put the plane, almost empty of fuel, down very gingerly on the runway at Saigon, and the deserters on board cheered. As the plane taxied to a parking place, soldiers poured out of the luggage holds. As cameraman Marriott was filming the unloading, a South Vietnamese Air Force security officer arrested him for taking these pictures. The Air Force had things under control again. But the men and women of World Airways had brought their plane and its load home. Bruce Denning, CBS News, back from Da Nang.
Cameraman Marriott was later released and the soldiers aboard that plane were arrested. With the end, for now, of flights out of Da Nang, there is only one escape route left for the hundreds of thousands of refugees: the sea. Today, an American sea lift operation brought 10,000 of those people to Cam Ranh Bay, some 300 miles away, leaving thousands of others at the dock because there wasn't enough room. And President Ford ordered American Navy LSTs to Da Nang today. More on the sea rescue mission from Bernard Kalb in Washington.
A Pentagon analyst says it looks as though Da Nang is finished. And that bleak estimate coincides with a decision for the U.S. Navy to lend a humanitarian hand to help evacuate refugees from that general area. The Pentagon says that for the first time, U.S. Navy vessels in all 4 LST type of ships will join in the effort. These ships are being ordered to proceed from the Philippines to the Da Nang area. They're expected to remain offshore and help pick up refugees from sampans or barges. The capacity of each one of these 4 ships about 1,000 persons. The Pentagon emphasizes that the mission is humanitarian, not combat, and that the crews are being told not to endanger any American lives and to avoid any situation where they might be shot at. Bernard Kalb, CBS News, the Pentagon.
From Da Nang itself, other reports of chaos, none of those reports confirmed by American journalists. South Vietnamese soldiers are said to be looting and killing for food. An angry mob, so goes another report, has sacked the abandoned U.S. consulate, and the Viet Cong claims its forces are already in the city. The refugee crisis in Vietnam is so critical that U.S. Army Chief of Staff Frederick Wyan reportedly requested an emergency medical airlift from Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. Wyan is in Saigon on a fact-finding mission for President Ford, trying to find out how the Thieu government intends to deal with an enemy that now controls more than half the country's territory. More on the Wyan story from Peter Collins.
General Wyan's mission is focusing on a single key question. Do the South Vietnamese still have the capability and will to fight? If any American can answer that question, it should be General Wyan. In nearly 5 years of service in Vietnam, ending as the top American commander, he got to know scores of officers and men throughout the South Vietnamese Army. One of the officers Wyan knows well is Lieutenant General Nguyen Van Thuan, now the commander of the 3rd Military Region around Saigon. In stark contrast to the northern provinces, this area north of Saigon is relatively calm, but it's across these rice paddies and rolling countryside that more than 4 North Vietnamese divisions are expected to attack in the next few weeks. But at 3 Corps headquarters in Bien Hoa, Wyan found an upbeat mood among General Thuan and his staff. Wyan said it was too early to make a general assessment, but he did talk about finding himself back in Vietnam exactly 2 years to the day after he closed the American command and left for the United States.
Just kind of good. Seems
maybe it's sort of inconsistent to say something like that when war is going on as close to this place as it is, but anyhow, I do feel good about coming back. It's good to see you.
Peter Collins, CBS News, Bien Hoa, South Vietnam.
As for the Vietnamese people living in the relative safety of Saigon, there are conflicting moods about the war. Murray Fromson reports.
The two moods of Saigon. One is the will to fight, the other is not. At a moment of widespread confusion over South Vietnam's military collapse, several thousand people demonstrated for more U.S. military aid. Civil servants, union organizers, pensioners participated in a government-sponsored march. Many were elderly. Their banners said, "We have the spirit to fight, but lack the means." After reaching City Hall, the demonstrators were told the war could not be fought without the additional aid requested by the Ford administration. A short distance away, anti-war students at Minh Duc College fought with police, insisting they would refuse to go into the Army. The number of draft resistors has mounted in recent months. The students barricaded themselves on the campus. They threw rocks, they broke up tables and chairs to fight the police, who charged at them with clubs. Pedestrians watched from the street. Some students were caught and arrested. A girl was among them. Father Din Bin Din, the dean of the college, tried to mediate with police. But the rock throwing continued until enough police were brought in to overwhelm the demonstrators. Murray Fromson, CBS News, Saigon.
Cambodian troops defending Phnom Penh retreated to within 5 miles of that city today, abandoning trucks and ammunition to rebel forces. Meanwhile, government sources confirmed rumors that President Lon Nol, under increasing military and political pressure, will leave